All right, we'll now have Andy Kim talking to us about the economic shadow value of small-scale fisheries.
Hello, my name is Andy Kim, and my project this year was to provide an economic shadow value of the small-scale fisheries in the Antonjil Bay region. If we consider the typical ways that value is assigned to commodities, the true value of the fish caught by small-scale fisheries is invisible. In Antonjil Bay, 0% of the catch never enters a formal market and never gets exchanged for cash value. If instead we want to reveal the true total value of small-scale fisheries, we need a way to quantify the non-market-based value that is produced. This value is hidden in the economic shadow. So, why do small-scale fisheries matter? Like many other rural coastal communities around the world, in Antonjil Bay, small-scale fisheries make it possible for millions of daily transactions to occur, so fish makes its way from a fisherman's pirogue to a family's dinner table. Though these fisheries are crucial sources of income and nutrition for these communities, the importance of small-scale fisheries is not given nearly enough recognition on a national level. More often than not, governments and policymakers are unaware of the true economic value of small-scale fisheries, instead emphasizing fishery management efforts on the industrial sector. So that brings me to my goal this summer, which was to capture the shadow value of 5 specific small-scale fisheries in Antonjil Bay. A shadow value refers to the valuation of something that is not captured by the market. This means that the value of small-scale fisheries does not end up in economic and policy models, creating a large divide between policymakers and millions of nutritionally vulnerable people. Though we are becoming increasingly aware of the crucial role these fisheries have for nutrition, food security, and income, we still don't have a way to quantify their value. So by identifying their economic value, policymakers are more easily able to determine the impact of fisheries management interventions versus other public health interventions in terms of cost effectiveness. So these shadow values would also lead to better projections and models for nutrient deficiencies in populations, which will be crucial over time as we expect to see large changes in our climate in the next few decades. So looking at this graph, we can see that there's a perfect storm right now brewing in the small-scale fisheries in low-latitude developing nations like Madagascar. This is where populations are most nutritionally vulnerable and at risk and dependent on fish. We can see here that rising sea temperatures along the equator are driving fish away from the equator and towards the poles, where populations are most nutritionally vulnerable. In addition, the region around the equator is also where fisheries are at most risk from increasing industrialization, illegal fishing, and weak governance. So in our analysis, we disaggregated the catch data by specific small-scale fisheries and calculated the average benefit earned by each fisher. We can see that there's a significant difference in the average amount of benefit earned by fishermen in the traditionally managed areas as opposed to the locally managed marine areas and the Marine National Park. This signals that there is likely much more fishing occurring in the traditionally managed sites due to less regulation. Thus, the disaggregated shadow values indicate that there is currently a high benefit of being in these traditionally managed sites, but this is only for the short term. Over time, this will likely result in long-term costs as overfishing impacts the replenishing of fish stocks. So I won't go into great detail here, but I'd like to briefly mention that we also looked at the catch per unit effort metric per site. This metric would help us understand the relative costs associated with fishing within each site. Costs such as time spent fishing and the price of repairing gear were all taken into account to get an understanding of how sites with different management structures varied. So overall, we estimated the value of these 5 small-scale fisheries in Antonjil Bay to earn approximately 1.31 million RERE daily, which translates to about 480 million RERE annually. This translates to roughly $148,680 in the US, earned per year from this region. Now, that might not sound like much to us, But we must remember that this value was invisible prior to this year. So this number, as well as its many implications, will hopefully help drive further research so that it becomes more feasible to create practical and effective policies that specifically target small-scale fisheries. So where do we go from here? In addition to understanding the economic and nutritional value of small-scale fisheries, climate and population models will also need to play an important part in estimating the human health burdens of environmental change in the next few decades. From the analysis, it would be suggested that we promote new strategies to affect small-scale fisheries so that we could, 1, boost investment in less intensive and domestically oriented aquaculture of cheap and nutritious species, 2, encourage farming species lower in the food chain to reduce dependence on wild-caught fish, and 3, allocate coastal land and water resource rights to small-scale fisheries. We need to better understand the true value of local fisheries to local communities if we are able to develop management strategies that provide maximum benefit to both fisheries and the populations that depend on them. Thank you for listening to my presentation and enjoy the rest of your night.